everyone. I know you're doing a much needed stretch, but we have a very little amount of time to talk about some enormous issues with two men who are chancellors and presidents of two large public urban institutions with enough strife, questions, and concerns that could take us through the afternoon. But we're not going to do all of that. We can't. Um, Later on, you're going to be hearing from students about what's happening on campus, and this is a chance to speak to Chancellor Jones and President Fenves about what's happening on their campuses. And we're going to start with UT Austin. Both of your schools, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the free speech issue because there's been so many issues throughout the country on this, and you've had specific incidences that you've been dealing with, in some cases, almost, I think, in the last 24 hours, you told me, or was it yesterday or the day before? A lot has been happening. So let's start with what's going on in Texas.
Well, free speech and academic freedom are absolutely core principles at the University of Texas at Austin and every university in the nation. And so it is something that is very important that we protect and, in fact, that we nurture. And we do have attempts to limit free speech that occur. The University of Texas has a very well-defined protocol when it comes to where speech is allowed, time, means, manner, and so on. But often the issues happen in classrooms or during a lecture or speaker setting. Our protocols are very well known by the faculty, and particularly in areas that tend to have more controversial, more publicly controversial issues. They're well known by the students, and for the most part, they're followed. A couple weeks ago, though, we had an incident in an engineering department that's not used to having controversial speakers, and it was a speaker having to do with the design and construction of a pipeline. And pipelines are in the news a lot, and so there was a disruption in the classroom, and it was an example of where the faculty just were unfamiliar with dealing with attempts to shut down speech, to limit speech, and unfortunately the lecture had to be canceled.
And the students react to that?
Well, many students were upset about it. Many parents of students were upset about it. And so we've been, since then, working with all the deans, with the department chairs, the faculty in general, to make sure that everybody understands what the policies are protecting free speech, what the protocols are if there's an attempt to disrupt the speech, and just making sure that we're enforcing those uniformly.
Chancellor Jones, what about on your campus recently?
Well, on our campus, as Greg indicated, we also value free speech, we value academic freedom, but we also make it very clear about part of our core value system is to make sure we do all we can to make sure the university is a safe and welcoming environment. Probably about 6 weeks.
Wait a minute, does that mean you have to have safe spaces?
No. I mean, we talk about this from a value proposition, but we like to think of the whole campus as a safe space, and we have to work hard to make it so. A few weeks ago, actually about 4 or 6 weeks ago now, and this all happened within about a 24 to 36 hour period, where we had a demonstration on campus that was co-opted by another group that was carrying a Israeli flag with bloody handprints on it. And then a few hours later that evening, there was a chalking on the mall, on the quad, as we call it. And chalking is part of how students express themselves on our campus. But unfortunately, this one was directed toward the Obama administration, in fact, Mr. Obama himself, in not very flattering terms. It even evoked John Lewis. And then it went on to say that build a wall and deport them all. And as you might imagine, that precipitated a lot of discussion on campus about the issue of free speech, and agreed to which this chalking represented free speech versus hate speech or hateful speech. And it also invoked a conversation with the faculty about issues of academic freedom. Anyway, since these things happen in such a short, compacted time period, we felt an obligation to respond and to not respond to each one individually because there was no time. And so we tried to respond to them as a collective by talking about the institution values around free speech, and that hate speech and hateful speech should be countered with more speech, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that message was received by different individuals in much different ways. There were some people who felt we hit the right tone regarding free speech. There was another part of our university community that felt the fact that I did not denounce the chalking itself and the hateful message, that we were somehow or another condoning that kind of white supremacist, hateful attitude. Notwithstanding the fact that every incident that has occurred on that campus in the short 6 months that I've been there, we've been very clearly denouncing those actions. So the lesson to me was that I have to be the denouncer in chief every time one of these incidents occur. That you can't just rely on the fact that you've tried to send a very strong message about your value system. You do have to constantly remind the university community of your values and what you will tolerate and what is antithetical to your value system.
How do you both deal with what students actually want you to do versus what you think is the right thing to do? I'm going to ask you both about how much time you actually spend meeting with students and hearing from them. So how do the students want you to handle a situation like you had a recent situation around Muslim students at University of Texas? I'm curious, you hear a lot of different back and forth, a lot of give and take on what you should do.
Well, first of all, I'm going to do what's in the best interest of the university and our values for the university. But to help me decide that, have great leadership teams, so we really do work as a team. But we listen to students a lot.
What is that like? How do you listen to them? Do you invite them into your office? Do you stop in and have a cup of coffee
Well,
with
this
students?
began soon after I became president. I've been president for almost 2 years, and we had a major issue that had been existed at the University of Texas for decades, having to do with statutes of Confederate figures. And several months into my presidency, we made a decision to move one of the statues of Jefferson Davis from the main mall.
Made a few headlines.
Oh, did it? Okay, wasn't aware of that. Anybody knew about it, but I used that as an opportunity to start to meet with students, and sometimes they were very small meetings. Sometimes I'd be meeting with groups of students. So I have been doing that in various ways since I became president. But after we had some truly abhorrent anti-Muslim, anti-immigration, anti-immigrant posters spread around campus. They were quickly taken down. But similar to the Chancellor, we have to strike the right balance about how much we say and what we say. And I probably didn't say enough condemning these messages. And so one result of that is a few days later we held a town hall meeting. And I think we filled up one of the ballrooms, so there were about 300 or 400 students there, and it was 2 hours listening to the students.
Chancellor Jones, you've only been around for 6 months. You stepped right into it at your school. Have you had that kind of a town meeting yet, or that opportunity to let the students, tell you what they think?
Well, we're having our first town hall next Wednesday, in fact.
Got some tips for him?
We'll let him finish first.
See what I missed, right? As I said, I've only been at Urbana for almost about 6 months now, and we had what we call a 150-day listening period, and we call it 150 days because of the sesquicentennial of this great university. And during that time period, not only did I meet, with the different departments and collegiate academic and academic support units, but through the collaboration and hard work of my Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, I have met with more configurations of student organization than I thought was possible in any university. And those have been valuable conversations because they've been conversations with groups of 12 to 20 students at a time. And these occur almost on a weekly basis. So we've had real up close and personal conversation with students. I've been to the Student Senate and had conversation with them in that configuration as well. But the biggest challenge we face is, how do you really engage with students, respect for their right to be activists, respect their right to protest, but then how do you get them after the protests and the advocacy, has been executed? How do you get them to come around the table as partners to find solution to these complex issues. And that's one of our biggest challenges at this university is to develop the level of trust that a lot of the issues that students brought to the table are issues that I care greatly about. And one of those issues is that we have to do a better job of recruiting more African American students. We do a
What's your
very good job.
percentage right now?
At this moment, African American students is only about 6% at the university, and the state is about 15% African American. So clearly, there's some work to be done, but it's one of the areas we've invested a lot of resources. But we have to find some common ground with the different student constituency group as well as alumni groups to map a strategy for it that will address this issue in a systematic way and yet retain the ability. Now, our African American students graduate. 6-year graduation rate is one of the highest in the country. It's about 85% of our students. So we don't have a large achievement gap as it relates to our African American and
But you only have
students.
6%.
Well, 6% is puts us at the top of the Big Ten, believe it or not.
And you're
so-
working on that a lot at UT, and you've had some Supreme Court issues to help you along. Can you talk a little bit about your efforts? It was a little more than 5% there last I looked.
Yes, undergraduate African American student body is a little over, just about 5%. That's correct. And this diversity and affirmative action have been something the University of Texas has worked on for a long time. We litigated that issue, the use of race and ethnicity as a factor in admissions decisions for 8 years, 2 trips to the Supreme Court.
I think that made a few headlines too.
It did, yeah, it did. And with a very important Supreme Court decision in June of last year upholding the university's position and our methodology in using race and ethnicity.
Well, how is that changing how you, your incoming freshman class? For example, you said it's higher than 5% now.
Yeah, so for fall of 2016, it was 5.1%. Now, to understand how we do it at Texas, it's important to know we have a very unique hybrid admissions policy that's set by state law, where 75% of our freshman admissions are automatic admissions based on high school class rank. The other 25% are holistic review of the entire application, and it was the 25% admissions process that was being contested in the courts.
How much do you hear from students about the need for diversity? You also have a very large Hispanic population in Texas and at your school, and you have some other factors in the mix too in Illinois. But I'm just curious, when you do speak to students, do they say we want more diversity or we want you to do a better job recruiting African American students or other ethnicities?
Absolutely. This is a very strong interest of the students, as it is among the faculty and among the leadership of the university. It has been for a long time, and it's a continual process to work to achieve those goals.
Well, how do you do that? What are you doing, for example, in Illinois to boost those levels?
Well, one of the things that there are multiple things that we do, and we've taken, first of all, this commitment because, as you indicated, our students take this issue very seriously. Not only increasing representation of students, but also faculty as well. And this is work that I've been part of for most of my administrative career, and I'm probably one of the few chancellors and our presidents who came into higher education administration out of the diversity and equity work. So it's something I care greatly about. And so what we're doing is it actually comes down to be more strategic and intentional about being present in school systems where these students are enrolled and graduating from, working very closely with those school systems to have a presence there, be very clear about the value proposition of your institution, be very clear about, telling them about the success rate that students have at your university. But it all comes down to a financial issue, and that is having the financial resources to provide the scholarship support that's necessary to help students be successful, and that is one of our biggest obstacles. We are able to attract a very large, actually more than our market share, when you look at the data of students who are college ready from the African American and the Latino community. We actually get more than our market share. Our challenge becomes to the fact that we don't have the financial resources to be as competitive as some of our peer institutions and offering, because some of them are offering in-state tuition and an $8,000, $10,000 scholarship on top
You
of it.
can't match that.
We can't match it with our current budgetary situation. It makes it very, very difficult to do, but are now spending over $153 million a year in merit and other kinds of financial support. We have a new proposal in front of the legislature called the Triple I proposal that will provide another $170 million need-based and other merit-based scholarships. And some of that will be targeted at underrepresented groups.
If it's passed.
If it's passed.
So let's
when
talk-
it's passed.
Because you started the conversation. I noticed the first thing when college presidents and chancellors of large urban institutions get together, the first thing on their mind is funding. So I don't want to let you off the hook on the same question about what you're doing, but I assume you're experiencing similar financial pressures, and that is a big deal in terms of helping you attract low-income students and give them the kind of packages that make it affordable for them, correct?
Well, certainly the financial aid is a big factor in addition to the recruiting, and we have many similar strategic recruiting initiatives with high schools across the state. And they've been very successful in terms of the percentage of students who were yielding. One of our programs, we have 63% of the students that we give offers to are accepting our offers, and that's pretty good because the yield rate can be sometimes, unfortunately, too low. But finances are a really big issue. Cost of education is an important topic for all students. But as I pointed out at a recent Texas legislative hearing, sometimes we're trying to recruit students who we've admitted, and it's cheaper for them to go to an elite private university than to
Have
come
bigger
to their
endowments
public
and they can give
flagship.
more financial aid, correct?
That's correct.
So aside from fighting with your state legislatures, what else can you do about that and keep raising more money for gifts? What other options do you have to try and attract students and make your universities affordable?
Well, you just took one off the table, raising money for gifts. That's a big part of our development efforts, is the continuing the historic role that public universities, especially the flagship universities, have had of providing opportunity to students of all background, and we want to continue to be able to serve our state that way. But the other aspect is that once students are on campus, our recent Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan, one of our goals is every student feels welcome, feels that it's part of their campus, feels that it's their university. And for some students, that's not the case. And so we never want a student to decide not to come to the University of Texas because they've heard they wouldn't be welcome at the campus.
And how about from your perspective in Illinois?
Well, the same is true for us. We're embarking on a comprehensive campaign, the first in almost a decade at the university. And one of the top goals or strategies to that campaign is going to be focused on scholarship dollars. That's the number one goal as far as I'm concerned. The second goal will be to raise additional dollars to allow us to continue to hire and support the best and the brightest faculty. And then other things will flow behind those two strategic goals. But I want to use this as an opportunity to say, in addition to making sure that we're having and providing the best opportunity for our diverse students once they arrive on our campuses, we've got to folks in our position have to do a much better job of working with K through 12 system and making sure that we're leveraging our schools of education to impact teacher preparation and also to work directly in helping to close the achievement gap. Because higher education leaders spend a lot of time, with what used to be called remediation or developmental education. And I can tell you, folks, that is not a sustainable strategy from my perspective. Been there, done that, seen how difficult it is. And I know what I'm talking about is perhaps even more difficult, but I think higher education has to step up and declare itself as a partner with the K through 12 system, the commissioners of education, to think differently about teacher preparation and think differently about our role and responsibility for making sure that each and every child that comes through our K through 12 system have the habits and the skill set to be successful post-secondary, whether it's at the University of Illinois or UT Austin or wherever it might be. That needs to become part of
Do you have
our
a big problem
commitment.
with student preparedness? Are a lot of your students showing up on campus unready?
No, not at all. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having the kind of first to second year retention and graduation rates. But what I'm saying is, in order for us to be able to grow, to perhaps reach equity with the population in the state, we have to work with school system to address fundamentally the issue of college readiness. And you can't, because is in many, as true in many places, far too many of our students are not graduating, particularly African American students and particularly African American males. And we have to make a commitment to start to work, upstream of those problems rather than always depending on developmental education techniques and strategy to try to get students prepared once they arrive on our campuses.
President Fenves, is that an issue as well for you, the readiness?
Well, similar to Illinois, our students come very well prepared. The problems that we have seen from students who maybe first in their family go to college, they may be coming from an underserved high school in rural Texas, is
And English may not be their first language.
English
correct?
may not be their first language. Some of them are first in their families to graduate from high school. And the problem is not so much academic preparation. These are smart kids. It's the skills to learn how to be successful in a university environment that may be 10 or 100 times bigger in size and population than the town they came from. With very high expectations, with lots of other smart kids. And so the programs we've developed that have been, I think, fabulously successful are not academic remediation. It's skill building, and it's developing that resilience that if a student fails their first chemistry exam, that doesn't mean they're a failure in college. That means they're going to learn how to study better. They're going to work a little harder, work a little smarter and differently.
And they may need help. I want to get back to the mood on campus, and then I'd love to open it up to some questions because we're going to be hearing from some students later. Curiously, how do you describe the mood on your campus of the students right now? Are they, as you're talking about a wide-ranging set of issues here, from college completion to readiness to access to how they come in to recruiting. What's the overlying mood you hear the most from students about? Is it free speech? Is it coming out in debt? Is it getting a job? What's the mood? Who wants to go first?
It's getting through finals in a couple weeks. It's being academically successful.
In addition to those critical issues, I can tell you the mood on campus during most of the 6 months that I've had the pleasure of serving as the 10th Chancellor has been one of uncertainty. Our students have to wrestle with a climate that oftentimes make them feel unwelcome. And with a lot of the things that are happening around the country and it plays out in Illinois as well, it creates a climate of fear. And that's what I often hear from our students, that they're greatly concerned about the deterioration of the climate on campus in ways that most of us have not experienced. And when you add all of that together with the budgetary challenge, both from the state level and now some of the proposals coming down from on the federal side that will dramatically impact the issue of affordability and accessibility for students, there's a lot of uncertainty out there surrounding deportation issues, surrounding immigration issues, visas issues. So it is one of the most uncertain periods in higher education that I've experienced in my nearly 37 years at this work.
Would you agree?
Well, many of those concerns are very prevalent at UT also. The concern about immigration
And
in
you're so
particular.
close to the so-called wall.
We're close to the border. That's correct, and there's a lot of interest, a lot of interest in it, a lot of concern students have for their families and what may happen.
Absolutely. I'd like to take some questions. I see a hand right here. Or is that okay? Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Luann McNabb. I'm with the National Council of Teachers of English, and we are seeing a lot of faculty losing tenure, and most faculty are now adjunct faculty. Could you address that at your schools and how the rights of faculty? You've talked about students. What about faculty?
Well, we haven't experienced any loss in tenure because we have very clear guidelines and perspective on the balance and the ratio between tenure track faculty and other type of faculty that help carry out the teaching and research role at the university. Our biggest challenge is one of we're seeing for the first time the highest retention. We lost 40 more faculty last year than we typically would lose. You know, all universities deal with attrition, usually somewhere around 10% or so, 8 to 10%. But we lost 40 faculty members last year, primarily because of the climate of uncertainty about our budget. And but at the same time, we continued to invest the resources to recruit both at the tenure track line as well as other type of faculty to advance our teaching and research mission. So that has not been an issue at our university.
I think unfortunately we're out of time. Can I take one more question? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jill Welch, and I'm with NAFSA, Association of International Educators. Thank you so much for this panel and for your commitment to our students and to our country. I wanted to ask you a question about international students being afraid to come to the United States, and potentially faculty as well. Some of the early executive orders are, we think, having an adverse effect on future recruitments. And we did a survey with 6 other associations that showed that 40% of our colleges are seeing a decline in applications in graduate school and undergraduate level, particularly from some parts of the world. And I wanted to ask if there's something that university presidents could help with in, I think it's wonderful when you send messages to the campus about creating a welcoming environment. Dr. Jones, I really appreciated what you just said as well. But I'm wondering what more could be done at the presidential level from the campus in sort of reminding Congress perhaps or state legislatures that there are impacts on this. I mean, you know how much money they bring to your schools as well, in addition to innovation.
Well, we have the best higher education system in the world, and it's attracted bright people from around the world, and it's very important to continue that. I was just meeting with a U.S. congressman over the weekend exactly on this issue, and they certainly understood that being able to continue to offer admissions and job offers and the visas is critically important. We're going to have an indication fairly soon about what the impacts are going to be with the, I believe, May 1st deadline coming up for commitments for offers of graduate admission. We're tracking it now. We don't see it much different from previous years, but this is a situation that very much concerns me. We've been trying to communicate to students and to prospective students that we're still a great university that's trying to attract the best minds. But there are certainly some serious headwinds to getting that message out.
I think we have to end here on the age of uncertainty on college campus. It sounds a little bit grim, all the things that we've been talking about. Are anyone having fun on your campuses anymore?
Oh, every day, sometimes twice a day, absolutely. No, I want to be clear. Yes, we are facing some of the greatest challenges, folks, I think, in higher education. But call me an eternal optimist. I look at these great challenges as amazing opportunities. I've dropped a microphone, but it's not mine.
Thank you.
Thank you.